Anthem. I would straight up call it the worst failure of 2019 and one of the worst AAA failures specifically of all time. This was a game that showed so much promise when we first saw it back in E3 2017. That gameplay presentation really wowed a lot of people in terms of the potential it conveyed. But then we learned, of course, that the footage was 100% fake. It was something that EA and BioWare sort of threw together last minute when barely any of the actual game had actually been built. It was less gameplay footage and more of like a gameplay pitch, with many BioWare staff learning what the game would look like at the same time as audience members did when we all saw the footage unveiled for the first time. Basically, the goal for the studio after E3 2017 became to match that fake gameplay footage once they actually started building Anthem late into its development cycle. And it goes without saying that things didn't quite pan out. Everything about the final game is a huge downgrade from what was originally presented, and just in general, the game launched incomplete, poorly designed, and woefully unpolished on almost every facet. Word about BioWare's second consecutive failure spread quickly, so it came as no surprise when we all learned during EA's May 2019 earnings call that Anthem sales had overall disappointed. As it reads right here, quote, "The launch of Anthem in Q4 did not meet our expectations." Now, despite this, throughout this earnings call, EA did insist that there are long-term plans for Anthem, how they have no intention of abandoning the project despite the rough launch. Here's what they said exactly. "We are similarly committed to the live service for Anthem and delivering for our community in this new IP over the long term. The launch of Anthem in Q4 did not meet our expectations. However, we believe in the team at BioWare, and we also believe in what they set out to achieve with this game, building a new IP and melding genres to reach a new audience. Players have spent more than 150 million hours in Anthem since launch, and we have heard from them that the beauty and expanse of the world is stunning, and that traversing the environment in the Javelin suits makes for amazing gameplay. However, we have also heard feedback from our community about issues that began to manifest as the game reached scale, and that they want more depth and variety in the mission modes of the game. The team is now very focused on continued improvements to the game and will then bring more content updates and in-game events that will enhance and expand the Anthem experience." The following month, during an interview with website Game Daily, when inquired about Anthem, Andrew Wilson continued to reassure that EA still has long-term plans for Anthem, stating the following: "If we believe that at the very core the world wasn't compelling people, if we believed at the very core that the characters weren't compelling for people, or the Javelin suits weren't compelling, or traversing the world and participating in the world wasn't compelling, then, provided we hadn't made promises to our players, we might not invest further. IP lives for generations and runs in the 7 to 10 year cycles. So if I think about Anthem on a 7 to 10 year cycle, it may not have had the start that many of us wanted, including our players. I feel like the team is really going to get there with something special and something great, because they've demonstrated that they can." But fast forward to another earnings call that EA hosted more recently on July 30th, 2019, and there seem to be clear signs that disposition towards the game may have changed. In this latest earnings report, the publisher touted all kinds of games, from their ever financially successful FIFA and Madden, to the successfully launched and steadily holding Apex Legends, to the ever-popular Sims, to upcoming projects like Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. But one game that went almost completely unmentioned was Anthem, which back in May, EA adamantly insisted they still had faith in. Throughout this entire earnings call, Anthem came up on just 2 occasions, both rather fleetingly. On one occasion, after flaunting sales of their mobile outings, Blake Jorgensen very quickly mentioned how strong the digital side of Anthem sales were when discussing the trend of digital sales outgrowing physical, noting how 47% of EA's overall unit sales are now digital rather than physical. Now, understand that this doesn't mean Anthem's sales met guidelines and projections. It just means that in terms of the ratio of digital versus physical, Anthem sold better digitally. The second time Anthem came up was nearly towards the end during the earnings call's Q&A session. When asked about R&D budget and how that's being allocated across new projects, Jorgensen fleetingly mentioned how Anthem is an example of a new IP, but no substantial information was provided about sales figures or just the general state of the game. This is all a stark contrast compared to other EA franchises, which the company delved deeply into in terms of sales figures and player count and all this other information. Just to put things into perspective, when I searched for how many times the word Anthem was used throughout this entire earnings call, the result I got was a measly 3 times. The word FIFA, on the other hand, was used 41 times, the word Madden was used 21 times, the word Sims was used 24 times, the words Apex Legends were used 22 times, and the list just goes on. Now, looking back to the May earnings call, the term Anthem was actually used quite a bit, 17 times, versus the current 3. It's very clear that EA actively tried to avoid talking about Anthem during this meeting, which goes to show that the publisher is not at all happy with its performance, that they're too embarrassed to talk about it, and that they aren't confident in the title's future. This is what companies do. They'll flaunt their successes and barely mention their failures, particularly ones as embarrassing as Anthem. Recall that Konami also did something similar with Metal Gear Survive. Back in May 2018, during Konami's earnings call, they touted all kinds of other successes, but sales figures for the recently launched Metal Gear Survive were entirely omitted, in all likelihood because the game just didn't sell very well, not to mention that it was met with generally negative critical reception, as well as disdain from fans of the series and video game enthusiasts as a whole, who felt like Metal Gear Survive was an exemplary example of what a cash grab looks like. Now, going back to Anthem, if its current pattern of EA promising long-term support in one earnings call, and then omitting to mention the game almost entirely in the next earnings call, gives you a sense of déjà vu, that's because EA did the exact same thing with another one of their embarrassing launches, Mass Effect Andromeda, a game whose post-launch development cycle was cut short. It's actually eerie how exactly history seems to be repeating itself. Much like how Anthem was delayed from fall 2018 to March 2019, Andromeda was delayed from fall 2016 to March 2017 after a tremendously troubled development. Much like Anthem, Andromeda garnered generally negative reviews from critics and consumers. Much like with Anthem during EA's May 2019 earnings call, during EA's May 2017 earnings call, when the topic of Andromeda's less-than-stellar launch was brought up, the company assured long-term support. Andrew Wilson's response from back then reads as follows: "The first thing is Mass Effect is an interesting title. It was in development for a really long time and represented a lot of great things that BioWare is known for. Story, size, depth, breadth, imagination. And while overall the aggregate review scores were lower than we would have liked, we did have over 100 reviewers score the game at 80 or higher. So it represents a fan base that's very passionate, looking for very particular things, and many players found exactly what they're looking for and some players did not. With that said, we believe Mass Effect Andromeda delivers a rich, deep experience which celebrates what makes the franchise great. Wonderful, beautiful, deep, rich worlds, amazing combat, and engaging, fast-paced multiplayer. New multiplayer content is continuing to be released, and new content kind of arriving overall more regularly so. We are very happy with kind of how BioWare's doing, how BioWare's treating Mass Effect, and our expectations for Mass Effect are still strong for the future and the franchise overall. And so we're very happy with BioWare. BioWare has continued to support Mass Effect, and the new team is doing some amazing things, and you'll hear more about that in the months to come. So the message conveyed here back in May 2017 is very much a mirror image of the assurances provided in May 2019 about Anthem, and all of a sudden, in future earnings calls, Mass Effect Andromeda is barely mentioned in earnings calls. As a matter of fact, during EA's July 2017 earnings call, Mass Effect was only mentioned 3 times. Coincidentally, that's exactly how many times Anthem got mentioned during EA's July 2019 earnings call. And just like with Anthem, Andromeda back then was only fleetingly brought up to talk about digital sales and whatnot, but with no specifics provided on sales figures, number of concurrent players, and future plans like DLCs and additional content. Now, Anthem's ultimate fate remains unwritten, But as far as Andromeda goes, only a month after the July 2017 earnings call where EA barely mentioned Andromeda, on August 2017, it was confirmed that BioWare would be dropping support for the game. So that meant no additional patches to fix the game's myriad technical issues and laughable animations and visuals, and this meant no additional content like DLC that was clearly hinted at in the game. So yeah, do you see what I mean here? Anthem and Andromeda's post-launch histories and their post-launch treatment from EA are parallel. We are looking at two BioWare games that got similar reassurances of long-term support in a May earnings call, who then barely got mentioned in the July earnings call. And with Andromeda, support for the game eventually got axed. And with Anthem, I can't imagine something very similar happening, given the game is in a horrible state right now. I don't have to remind you how the game was plagued with so many issues that BioWare was forced to delay its entire roadmap. They got like one stronghold out, but everything else has been pushed back indefinitely. And right now, if you go to the website, there is no roadmap to speak of. The saving grace of the game was supposed to be the Cataclysm, this major event that's supposed to reshape the world and act as the next chapter of Anthem's storyline and endgame, but it turned out to be nothing more than just a slight variation of the same boring gameplay loop, but more timer-based and with an Instagram filter layered on top. Now, the Cataclysm has been running on a public test server on PC for quite some time now, and generally the feedback has not been all that positive. At best, it's just more content, but it's certainly nothing to write home about that will bring Anthem back from the brink. To make matters worse, some of the game's technical issues are worse than ever, with frequent game and server crashes continuing to permeate the experience, despite 5 months having gone by since the game's launch. If you go to Anthem's official subreddit, for example, you'll find plenty of posts like these with headlines that read, "The Cataclysm can now clearly be seen from Fort Tarsis in free play, but game crashes every few minutes." Here's another Reddit user offering proof, showing an extensive error history entirely comprised of Anthem crashes that are minutes apart. So not only is Anthem lacking in long-term content worth being excited about, the game's still fumbling when it comes to basics like stability. Forget the fact that the Cataclysm is looking to be a dull addition to an already dull game. The fact of the matter is that for a lot of people, Anthem still remains broken and unplayable in its current poorly optimized state. And then there is the fact that there are so few players playing Anthem right now that it's becoming more and more difficult to matchmake with other players, which is about the worst thing that can happen to one of these MMO-light live service multiplayer-focused experiences. This is a dead service, as far as I can tell, not a live one, and as the weeks and months go by, EA seems to be realizing this more and more. Or hell, maybe they've known for a while now, and they're just trying to reduce the impact by killing Anthem off slowly, by luring people into a sense of security with fake assurances that will in reality culminate in Anthem getting canned, which is exactly what happened with Andromeda. Either way, all I know is that Anthem is playing out exactly as Andromeda is right now in terms of how EA seems to be slowly backpedaling away from Anthem and abandoning it. As soon as a publisher becomes too ashamed of a project originally intended for long-term support to talk about it during recent earnings calls or refuse to continue providing assurances, you know that they're ready to give up on it, to cut their losses. And honestly, at this point, maybe cutting their losses is the right thing to do instead of trying to keep pulling the strings of the few remaining players and hopefuls. I just don't see a way out of Anthem personally. It's far too broken, far too poorly designed, it's garnered far too much ill will, and its future content is far too shallow for me to imagine a future in which this game makes any sort of comeback. Nothing short of tearing everything down and building it back up, nothing short of a Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn style reboot can save this game. Because Anthem's foundation is simply far too broken to patch up with mere tape and extra layers of paint. Not to mention that Anthem has run out of time. The Cataclysm was supposed to come out back in May, but we're now entering August now, and there are still no signs that the Cataclysm will soon exit public testing server and release a final version for everyone to play. And we're looking at games like Borderlands 3 and No Man's Sky's Beyond update looming on the horizon. And when BioWare does eventually launch the Cataclysm in its final form, platform, it still doesn't look like the kind of content that will be good enough to revitalize this morbid product, and there's also no guarantee that crippling issues like frequent game crashes and a lackluster loot and upgrade system won't persist and make the new content unplayable and unenjoyable anyway. Yeah, I don't know what more there's to say about this, guys. I don't think I've quite seen a train wreck of this magnitude from a prolific AAA studio, and based on the pattern I'm seeing right now in terms of EA's behavior towards this game, sort of pretending like this game doesn't exist, Anthem's demise seems, to me, all but guaranteed. I feel like EA is ready to give up. These are one man's thoughts and opinions anyway. I'd love to hear what your take is on the current state of Anthem and EA's omission of the game from their latest earnings call in the comments below. With that, I would like to end this news update and discussion video. Thank you for tuning in. To be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.